Imagine you're holding a handful of earth, dark, warm, living earth. It smells of rain, of forest, of something ancient. And in that moment, you know this isn't a dead mass. It breathes. Now imagine someone stole this knowledge over 100 years ago, not from you personally, but from your great-grandparents, from the farmers who knew how to bring soil to life without spending a single cent. Who knew what was going on beneath the earth long before scientists in labs figured it out? Who didn't leave their children hunger, but fertility? This knowledge still exists, but it was buried, deliberately, systematically, because it was too powerful, too simple, too independent. Today, we buy fertilizers that make our soil emptier year after year. Today, we pile compost on soil that has long forgotten what it means to be truly alive. And we call that modern. But somewhere in the cellars of old estates, in the diaries of forgotten farmers, in the hands of a few people who still know, lives a method that makes all of that superfluous. A method that doesn't add nutrients, but brings life back. I'm telling you, what you hear in the next few minutes, you won't forget. Not because I'm promising you something spectacular, but because somewhere within you, perhaps even with the first sentence, the feeling has surfaced that you've always known this, that the earth is more than a container, that growth shouldn't be forced, but enabled, and that the most powerful solutions aren't invented in labs, but in the quiet between trees, on the knees of old people silently digging in the earth and smiling because they know what's waiting down there. Let's take a look together. I'm glad you're here because this is one of those topics where people later say, I wish I had known this earlier. Stick around until the end. What I show you in the second half is what everything else builds upon, and it will fundamentally change you if you have a garden or ever want one. Now let's start. To understand why this soil trick is so revolutionary, we first need to understand what soil actually is. Not in the school definition, not as a substrate, not as a subsoil, but as what it truly is. A living system, an ecosystem under our feet that is more complex, more interconnected, and more active than any rainforest we see above ground. Imagine you take a teaspoon of healthy garden soil. In that single teaspoon, there are more living creatures than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, mites, springtails. A whole universe that reproduces, interacts, dies, and regenerates millions of times daily. This soil breathes, it communicates, it processes nutrients, breaks down toxins, stores water, and releases it again. It's not a dead mass we sprinkle fertilizer on, it's an organism. And that's precisely the core of the problem with modern agriculture and modern horticulture. We treat soil like a container we have to fill. We think, give the soil nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and it will grow. That's like saying, give a person calories and they'll be healthy. It's true to some extent, but it misses the essential point. Healthy soil doesn't come from what we add. Healthy soil comes from what we enable, through processes that we don't force, but can facilitate. And it's precisely this difference that the farmers of the 19th century understood, not through science, but through centuries of observation. In the 19th century, in large parts of Europe, especially in the rural areas of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, and also Russia, there was a practice among the poorer farming populations that was increasingly forbidden or disparaged as backward by large landowners, estate managers, and later also by the first modern agricultural authorities. This practice had many names. In different regions, it was called differently, but the principle was always the same. They buried organic material, especially wood, in various stages of decomposition, directly in the soil, not as a layer on top, not as a pile next to it, but deep within it, integrated, as part of the soil itself. The farmers had observed what happened in old forests. When a tree died and fell, over decades, the forest swallowed it. The rotting wood attracted worms, fungi, moisture. Plants growing near dying giant trees thrived particularly well. The earth there was different, darker, looser, more alive. The farmers copied this principle. They dug up their exhausted fields, placed rotting branches, trunks, leaves, and grass residues inside, covered everything again with soil, and planted over it. What emerged was not a normal garden bed. What emerged was an underground compost pile that released nutrients, stored water, and fundamentally changed the soil structure over years and decades. Why was this forbidden? Here's where it gets interesting. The first reason was ideological. The emerging agricultural science of the 19th century, driven by men like Justus von Liebig, was fascinated by the idea of rationalizing agriculture. They wanted to understand what plants needed, isolate it, dose it, sell it. Liebig's mineral theory, which stated that plants only needed minerals and that organic matter in the soil was secondary, became the basis of modern fertilization. This theory was partially correct, but it was also incomplete, and its incompleteness had massive consequences. Interestingly, Liebig himself recognized the limitations of his own theory towards the end of his life and tried to warn the agricultural industry about the consequences of exclusive mineral fertilization. He was ignored. The money had already flowed into the fertilizer industry. The second reason for the prohibition of these methods was economic. Farmers who regenerated their own soil with what nature gave them for free became independent. Independent farmers bought less. This contradicted the interests of the landowners and later the emerging agricultural industry. In addition, many of these methods were considered resource extraction from noble or state-owned forests. Collecting deadwood, cutting branches, gathering leaves from forests was forbidden or strictly regulated in many regions. Anyone who buried wood in their field had to get this wood from somewhere, and if they got it from the wrong forest, they committed a criminal offense. So there was a combination of a scientific paradigm shift, economic interest, and legal restriction that led to this method almost completely disappearing from the active knowledge of agriculture within a few generations. Almost completely, because in some regions, particularly in the Carpathians, in parts of Eastern Europe, and in isolated alpine valleys, families continued to practice this method in secret. Today we know this method by a more modern name, Hugelkultur. But the word Hugelkultur only describes a part of it. What I want to show you in this video is the complete principle, the system behind it, and why it surpasses composted soil in almost every category. Before I get to that, I want to pause for a moment and explain why this topic is more relevant today than ever before. Not in an abstract global political way, but very concretely. We live in a time when food prices are structurally rising, not just because of temporary crises, but because of profound changes in the supply chain, energy costs, and political instability in agricultural regions worldwide. At the same time, the quality of soil in industrial agriculture is in dramatic decline. The United Nations has repeatedly warned that a significant portion of agricultural land will be degraded within the next few decades if cultivation methods do not fundamentally change. For people who have a garden or pursue the idea of at least partially providing for themselves, this is a direct message. Soil quality is everything. And the question of how to improve this soil quickly, permanently, and without great financial expense is not an academic question. It's a practical, life-relevant question. That's why today we're talking about an almost forgotten soil trick developed by ordinary people who had to survive, didn't want to think about agricultural technology, but needed results. And that's exactly why it works so well. It's not designed for perfection, but for reality. Now let's get to the core, the actual system. I'll break it down into principles because it's important that you not only know what to do, but why it works. If you understand the why, you can apply this method in any climate, on any soil, at any scale. The first principle is soil eats wood. More precisely, the soil needs carbon, and the best thing you can give it is slowly decomposing wood mass. Compost is good. Compost is rotted organic material that has been broken down and put into a form that plants can absorb relatively quickly. That's its advantage. It's also its disadvantage because compost is consumed quickly. You give your soil a portion of food, and after 1 or 2 seasons, that food is largely depleted. You have to compost again, apply again, over and over. Buried wood, especially semi-rotted wood, material that has already begun to decompose but is still structurally recognizable, releases nutrients over a period of 5 to 20 years. That's no joke. A bed created this way won't need any more fertilizer for at least a decade. The reason lies in the composition of wood. Wood largely consists of cellulose and lignin. These compounds are so complex and stable that no single organism can break them down completely. It takes an entire community, fungi that break down lignin, bacteria that further process the released compounds, insects and worms that mechanically break down the material. This community works slowly but constantly, and in the process, it attracts other organisms that further enrich the soil. This is not a human-made process. This is the ancient process of forest soil that we simply transfer under our garden beds. The second principle, store water without building anything. One of the biggest problems in gardens, especially during periods of irregular rainfall, is water supply. Either there's too much at once and the water runs off or collects, or there's too little and the soil dries out. Decomposing wood is like a sponge. It can absorb and store several times its own weight in water. So if you place a layer of semi-rotted wood material under your beds, you create a natural water reserve that slowly releases water to the soil during dry periods and absorbs water during rainy periods that would otherwise run off. Experiments have shown that beds created using this method can go up to 3 times longer without irrigation during dry phases than conventionally planted beds. For people who rely on rainwater or live in regions with unreliable precipitation, that's no small difference. That's the difference between harvest and crop failure. Imagine it this way. Conventional soil is like a brick. You water it, the water seeps in briefly, and after a hot day, everything is dry. Soil with an underground wood layer is like a bath sponge. You squeeze it, it releases water. You let it fill, it absorbs. Between these two states, there's always a medium moisture content that gives plant roots exactly what they need. The third principle, warmth from within. This is an aspect that many people overlook, and it's one of the most important for people in temperate and colder climates. When organic material decomposes, it generates heat. Everyone who has ever touched a compost pile knows this. This heat is biologically generated by the metabolism of billions of microorganisms working daily in an active compost. The same thing happens underground. A bed with a buried wood layer generates soil warmth. Not spectacularly, not like a heater, but measurably. The soil temperature is consistently 2 to 4 degrees higher than in an untreated bed. What that means is this: you can start the season earlier. Plant roots grow faster in warmer soil. In regions where spring comes slowly or autumn ends early, this can mean you have 4 to 6 weeks more growing time. That's like you've moved your garden a bit further south. The fourth principle, activate the mycorrhizal network. This principle is perhaps the most fascinating and least known, and it's why plants growing over buried wood mass not only thrive better, but are also more resistant to diseases, pests, and stress. Mycorrhizal fungi are fungi that form symbiotic relationships with plant roots. They grow into the roots and expand the plant's network many times over. Through this connection, the plant receives water and minerals that its roots alone could not reach. In return, it gives the fungus sugars and carbohydrates derived from photosynthesis. This network, often called the wood wide web, connects not just one plant with one fungus, but hundreds of plants with each other. In healthy soil, plants communicate via this network. If a plant is suffering from pest infestation, it sends signals through the fungal network, which causes other nearby plants to strengthen their own defenses. For this network to develop, it needs a specific type of soil. It needs soil that is rich in carbon, not regularly dug up, and has a stable, long-term structure. Buried wood creates exactly these conditions. The slowly decomposing wood mass is the habitat where mycorrhizal fungi flourish. Compost, on the other hand, is a quickly available substrate, often produced through intensive turning and high temperatures. These temperatures kill many fungal spores. Compost directly feeds the plant. Buried wood feeds the ecosystem that supplies the plant, and that's a fundamental difference. Few realize this. A bed based on conventional compost makes you long-term dependent on new compost additions. A bed with an underground wood layer increasingly develops its own dynamics, its own food cycles, and becomes self-sustaining over time. The fifth principle, the soil lifts itself. Anyone who builds a bed using this method observes something peculiar. After a few years, the bed is actually higher than the surrounding ground. Not because of the materials that were applied, but because the soil literally grows. How is this possible? When organic material decomposes in the soil, worms and other soil-dwelling organisms multiply in massive numbers. Earthworms alone can move up to 300 tons of earth per hectare per year through their bodies. In doing so, they excrete what is known as worm humus, droppings that have a significantly better soil structure and nutrient density than the original soil. The activity of soil organisms thus not only produces nutrients, but also volume. The soil becomes loose, airier, deeper. Plant roots can grow deeper, finding more water, more nutrients. A positive spiral that reinforces itself. Compare this to a garden that is dug up every year. Digging destroys soil structure, kills fungal networks, releases carbon, and leads to compaction. Modern permaculture and no-dig methods are based precisely on this insight. Soil should not be disturbed. It should grow. The sixth principle, layering, is crucial. The good thing about this method is that it's not a precision tool, but the order of the layers makes a difference, and it's worth understanding that difference. The bottom layer, at a depth of 30 to 50 cm, should contain the coarsest, oldest wood. Larger trunks that already show signs of decay. These decompose the slowest and form the long-term nutrient reserve. Above that comes smaller branches, twigs, material that decomposes faster. This material will be active for the first 3 to 5 years and support the initial phase of growth. Over the wood layers comes a layer of nitrogen-rich material. This is important. Wood is very carbon-rich but nitrogen-poor. In the decomposition process, microorganisms consume nitrogen. If this nitrogen doesn't come from outside, they take it from the soil and thus from the plants. This is called nitrogen depression, and it's the mistake many people make when they first work with this method. Nitrogen-rich materials can be grass clippings, fresh leaves, kitchen waste, manure, nettle cuttings, or even well-rotted compost. Ironically, compost is therefore indeed a component of the system here, but not as a main element, but as a nitrogen source in the transition phase. Above the nitrogen-rich layer then comes the actual planting soil, ideally topsoil that has been enriched with some compost. That's the setup, simple. No special tools, no expensive material. Now I want to tell you something important before we get to the practical steps. I'm about to show you exactly how to implement this system in your garden, which types of wood you should use, which you must avoid, and how to build a bed that grows measurably better than a conventional compost bed in the very first season. Stay tuned. But first, we need to talk about an aspect almost no one mentions when discussing this method. The first season. The first season after establishing a hugelkultur bed or a buried wood bed is often the weakest. This is normal. The system needs time to get started. The microorganisms need to establish themselves. The fungal network needs to grow. The nitrogen that the fresh wood draws is not yet fully balanced. In the second and third seasons, the bed begins to find its rhythm. In the fourth and fifth seasons, the difference to a conventional bed is so clear that visitors to your garden will ask what your secret is. This is not a method for impatient people who want immediate results. This is a method for people who think long-term, for people who understand that true fertility cannot be bought but must be built. This reminds me of an image an old gardener once described to me. He said, "If you want a tree, plant it now. If you want a forest, start preparing the ground for it today. The compost pile feeds you today. The buried wood feeds your children." Let's move on to the practical steps. I'll give you a clear, actionable guide that you can start this season. Step 1. Choose and evaluate the location. Before you start digging, look at the spot where you want to build your bed. Pay attention to the following points. Light availability. This is the most important factor. Most vegetable plants need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. Even the best soil system in the world cannot compensate for that. Choose your location based on light, not convenience. Water drainage. Does water stand on the ground for more than an hour after heavy rain? Then you have a drainage problem. The buried wood system helps with this, but it's not a complete substitute for good drainage. In such areas, you should raise the bed. Tree roots. Avoid proximity to large trees, especially walnuts, which secrete juglone, a substance that inhibits many plants. Other tree roots can penetrate your bed and compete for water and nutrients. Wind protection. Light wind exposure is fine and helps against fungal diseases. Strong cold wind, however, especially from the north, can dry out plants and significantly shorten the growing season. Step 2. Collect and prepare the wood material. The material you need is available for free in most gardens, forests, or from tree care providers. Here it's important to know what you're taking. Soft woods like birch, willow, alder, poplar, hazel are ideal. These decompose faster and release nutrients more quickly. They are particularly suitable for the upper wood layers. Somewhat slower but more valuable in the long term are hardwoods like beech, oak, maple, and fruit trees. They form the lowest, most durable layer. Avoid coniferous woods with high resin content, especially fresh spruce or pine. Their resin content and terpenes greatly slow down decomposition and can inhibit some plant roots. If you use coniferous wood, only use it if it's well rotted and only in small amounts as an admixture. Also to be avoided, treated, impregnated, or varnished wood materials. Wood from construction projects with unknown treatment has no place in your garden soil. Toxic compounds from wood preservatives are slowly released into the soil and can remain there for decades. Diseased wood. Caution is advised here. Wood infected with fungal diseases like honey fungus should not be used, as you could introduce the pathogen into your soil. Slightly decayed wood without visible pest infestation, however, is ideal. How big should the pieces be? The answer is varied. For the bottom layer, thick trunks and branches, 5 to 20 centimeters in diameter, can and should be used. For the upper layers, finer branches, brushwood, straw. This variety of material sizes creates different decomposition rates and different habitats for soil organisms, which increases soil diversity. Step 3. Build the bed. Let me now describe the process concretely. I'll assume a standard bed of about 12 mm, e.g. your 44 mm long and 3 mm wide. This is manageable but produces a significant amount of vegetables if the soil is right. First, mark the area. You don't have to frame it, although a frame of wooden slats or stones helps to maintain the shape and prevent soil erosion. Then dig a pit. The depth should ideally be 40 to 60 centimeters. That's a lot. That means manual labor. But don't forget, you do this once, and after that, you won't interfere with the depth of this bed for the next 10 to 20 years. Place the excavated soil aside. It will be needed later. Now place the first layer of wood, coarse pieces, half-rotted, densely layered. The gaps between the pieces are not a problem. They fill with soil and create cavities that provide habitat for small creatures. Over the coarse wood comes a thin layer of soil, just a few centimeters, so that the next layer does not lie directly on the wood. Then the second wood layer of finer branches and brushwood. In between, you can incorporate kitchen compost, grass clippings, or manure. Now comes the nitrogen balance, which I already mentioned. Sprinkle a handful of hornmeal or bone meal over the wood layers. Alternatively, you can apply a generous layer of nettle cuttings, which acts as a natural nitrogen source. If you have manure, well-rotted horse manure or chicken manure, this comes on top as a layer now. Finally, fill the pit with the soil you set aside, supplemented with fresh topsoil or mature compost until the bed is slightly above the original level. This elevation is normal and intended. The bed will settle a bit in the first few weeks as the materials inside absorb moisture and compact. Water it thoroughly after establishment to start this process. This is crucial. From this moment on, never deep dig the bed again. Light surface loosening during planting is fine. Deep digging destroys everything you have built. Step 4. Optimize planting. In the first year, the bed is best planted with plants that do well in fresh substrate themselves and tolerate the initial nitrogen depression. These are primarily pumpkins, zucchini, cucurbits in general, potatoes, and other heavy feeders. This group has high nutrient needs but can also grow very well in substrate-rich but unbalanced environments. In the second year, the bed is suitable for almost everything. Tomatoes, bell peppers, eggplants, lettuce, herbs. The nitrogen balance has stabilized, and the mycorrhizal network is starting to spread. From the third year on, the bed is in full operation. Everything grows better here than in any conventionally built bed. A practical tip for the first year: If you have concerns about nitrogen availability, plant nitrogen fixers as neighbors. Clover, lupines, or other legumes can be sown nearby. They fix nitrogen from the air, thus contributing to faster balancing. At the same time, their blossoms attract pollinating insects. Now stick with it, because what I'm going to explain next is what truly makes the long-term difference. Step 5. Maintain and develop the system. A common question is, what do I do with the bed when the wood has completely decomposed after 10 years? The answer is, you don't do anything special. The wood won't simply disappear, but will have been transformed into humus. This humus is extraordinarily rich and has a structure that lasts for decades. A bed that has been built and managed using this method will have soil after 10 years that is fundamentally different from what you started with. If you want to renew the bed then, you can incorporate new wood layers again, this time by digging from the sides and pushing in material, or by slightly relocating the bed. You take 1/3 of the area, dig in new material there, and let the other third rest. Rotation is a proven principle. What you should do regularly is mulch the surface. Mulching is the art of covering the earth, and it is the simplest and most effective addition to the system. A 5 to 10 cm thick layer of mulch made of grass clippings, leaves, straw, or shredded material retains moisture in the soil, regulates temperature, suppresses weeds, and slowly releases nutrients. It's the interface between the surface and the underground system. Never completely remove the mulch layer. Always layer new materials on top. Over the years, a self-producing humus layer builds up this way, making your bed ever richer. Step 6. Incorporate trees and shrubs. The complete system doesn't just think in terms of beds, but in layers. A method that comes from permaculture, but has its roots in exactly the historical system described, is the incorporation of woody plants. Fruit trees, berry bushes, herb borders, and vegetable beds that live together in a structured space form a layered system. The deep roots of the trees draw nutrients from the subsoil that is unreachable for vegetable plants. The leaves fall and mulch the beds below. Fruits and seeds fall and provide for animals and tiny creatures. This approach is not suitable for every garden, but where space is available, it creates synergies that make the entire system more stable and productive. An apple tree standing over a vegetable bed created using the described method creates a microsystem that largely sustains itself. This aligns with what we said at the beginning. This method imitates the forest, and the forest is the most successful, self-sustaining production system known to Earth. Let me tell you now about a man who lived and documented this system in the early 20th century. Not because I'm naming names to lend authority, but because his example shows what's possible. This man lived in a region with barren, leached soils. The area was known for being unsuitable for agriculture. Cold subsoil, sandy earth, short summers. He took over a small piece of land no one wanted and began to dig trenches. Everywhere he dug, he placed old wood, branches, leaves, moss, and whatever organic material he found into the earth. He paved his entire piece of land this way, meter by meter, year after year. After 3 years, there was no vegetable garden in the region that was even remotely as productive as his. After 7 years, other farmers from the area came to understand what he was doing. He explained it to them. Some laughed, some tried it. Those who tried it reaped the same results. What distinguished him from the others was not intelligence, not special resources, not science. It was patience and trust in a principle he had derived from observing nature. We now return to the overall view. What have we understood so far? We have understood that healthy soil is not created by adding substances, but by building a living system. We have understood that buried wood stores water, generates heat, releases nutrients over decades, and activates the mycorrhizal network. We have understood that this method was practiced in the 19th century and then suppressed for economic and ideological reasons. We have understood that compost is a short-term solution, while this system creates long-term infrastructure. But there's another level I don't want to withhold from you, because it's the foundation of everything I've told you. The real secret is not the technique. The real secret is the attitude. Anyone who applies this system thinks differently about their garden. They don't see it as a production site, but as a living space. They don't see themselves as a producer, but as a designer of a process. They know they can control what they put in, but they don't control what it becomes. They trust the process. This attitude has practical consequences. Anyone who understands their soil as living will treat it differently. They won't dig unnecessarily, won't treat it chemically, won't water it when there's no need. They will observe instead of reacting. They will read the feedback the soil gives through the behavior of worms, fungi, plants, and tiny creatures. A garden cared for in this way develops a resilience that cannot be bought. It withstands dry periods. It recovers from diseases. It produces even in bad years because its basic structure is stable. And that is precisely the core of self-sufficiency, which goes far beyond planting tomatoes. Self-sufficiency means building systems that don't need constant intervention, that don't depend on external supply chains, that don't collapse at every disturbance. A bed created with this method is a small piece of independence. It sounds modest, but when many such small pieces come together, something meaningful emerges. I want to address some common mistakes people make when starting with this system, not to deter, but so you can avoid them. The first mistake is using wood that's too fresh. Fresh green wood still contains many living cells and resins, which greatly slow down the decomposition process. It requires much more nitrogen and can actually harm the bed in the first few years. If possible, use wood that has already started to decay. A brown color, slight cracking, and the first penetration of fungal threads are good signs. If you only have fresh wood available, store it in a damp place for a few months before using it. The second mistake is the missing nitrogen source. I've already mentioned this, but it's so important that I'll repeat it. If you bury wood without adding nitrogen, you will be disappointed in the first year. The plants will grow weakly and turn yellow. This is because the soil organisms use all available nitrogen for the decomposition of the wood. Make sure to incorporate nitrogen-rich materials between the wood layers. The third mistake is giving up on the system before it works. The critical moment is the first year. If the bed is not as productive as expected in the first year, many think the method doesn't work. That's wrong. The first year is the building year. Be patient. The fourth mistake is planting too deep after establishment. The soil settles significantly in the first few weeks after establishment. If you plant too shallowly or too early, plants can sink into cavities or be damaged by settling masses. Wait 1 to 2 weeks after establishment before planting so that the material can settle and compact. The fifth mistake is using too much of one type of wood. Diversity is key here too. A bed made exclusively of oak wood will decompose very slowly and may have a slightly acidifying effect. A bed made exclusively of birch wood decomposes quickly, but offers less long-term substance. Mix wood types to create a balanced long-term system. I want to address another dimension of this topic that goes beyond the individual garden. Soil is the capital of food security. Today, there is more degraded soil in the world than at any other time in human history. Erosion by rain, compaction by machinery, loss of organic matter due to intensive agriculture, salinization by irrigation. These processes reduce the global capacity for food production every year. This is not a distant, abstract threat. This is an ongoing process that affects the foundation of human civilization. We eat soil in the sense that everything we eat ultimately comes from the soil. Every person who builds up soil in their garden, instead of consuming it, makes a real contribution, not just for themselves, but for the system in which we all live. That sounds grand, but it starts with a single bed. The gesture of placing an old piece of wood in the earth and planting something over it is one of the oldest and yet most advanced actions a person can take. It says, I'm not just thinking about the next few months, I'm thinking about the next years and decades. I'm building something that will still be there after me. That's resilience. That's foresight. That's a form of freedom. Before we conclude, I want to go over some specific variations and extensions you can integrate into your system. The first variation is biochar. Biochar is charcoal produced in a special process at low temperatures. It is extremely porous and provides surface area for soil organisms, especially bacteria. Biochar alone is not a fertilizer, but as an addition to a wood-based soil system, it acts like a catalyst. It further increases water retention capacity and improves structure long-term. You can either buy biochar or make it yourself if you have access to a way to do controlled burning. Before incorporating it into the soil, Mix it with compost or manure so that it gets colonized first. Untreated biochar added directly to the soil initially draws nutrients to itself instead of releasing them. The second variation is incorporating rock dust or rock flour. This method, rooted in biodynamic agriculture, returns trace elements to the soil that are found in natural rock and are missing in leach soils. Basalt meal is the most commonly used and accessible form. It works slowly and takes 5 to 10 years to unfold its full effect. But in combination with the wood-based system, it closes the circles of mineral supply. The third variation is creating a small wetland biotope near the garden. This may sound like a luxury, but it is one of the most effective tools for natural pest control. Frogs, toads, bats, and certain bird species that live near water are the best pest controllers you can have. A small pond, a run in a container, a damp area with reeds is sufficient to attract these animals. The fourth variation is the inclusion of compost worms, not the normal earthworms that come naturally when the soil is healthy, but compost worms like Eisenia fetida, also known as the red wiggler. These worms process organic material at a speed that normal earthworms cannot match. You can set up a worm bin and add the worm's droppings, known as worm tea and vermicompost, to your bed as a concentrated nutrient additive. This is crucial. Vermicompost not only contains nutrients, but also living microorganisms in extremely high density. It is not a fertilizer in the classical sense, but a vaccine for your soil. Some gardeners have shown through experiments that small amounts of vermicompost applied to the soil surface can positively influence the soil biology for an entire season. I have shared a lot of information with you in this video. Let me summarize everything one more time so you have it clear in your mind. The trick we've been talking about is burying organic material, especially semi-rotted wood, directly in the garden soil. This method was practiced by farmers for centuries, increasingly displaced and forbidden in the 19th century, and in modern application, yields results that surpass compost-based methods in most criteria. It works because it doesn't give nutrients, but builds an ecosystem. It stores water, generates heat, activates fungal networks, and permanently improves soil structure. It takes time, but it gives time back. A bed once created with this method is low maintenance, productive, and resilient for years. You don't need specialized knowledge, expensive materials, or sophisticated techniques for this. You need wood, which you can find for free in many gardens and forests. You need a shovel, you need patience, and you need the willingness to start a process whose full fruits will only become visible in a few years. I know that in a world focused on immediate results, this is not the easiest offer. But I'm telling you, every person I know who has seriously started this system would not do it any other way today. The difference is too great, the soil too alive, the harvest too consistent. And the moment you reach into this soil with both hands, 3 or 4 years after establishment, in this dark, crumbly, warm, cool earth runs through your fingers, that moment is indescribable. You know you've built something real, something that belongs to you. That's the moment self-sufficiency stops being an idea and starts being a fact. We live in a time when much is uncertain. Supply chains, energy supply, food prices. Most of these things we cannot directly influence, but we can decide what grows right outside our door. We can decide how much of our food we produce ourselves. We can decide whether we become people who depend on systems they cannot control or people who have built a foundation. This old soil trick, developed by farmers who had no other choice, is a part of that foundation. Start this season, even if it's just a small bed, even if it's just an experimental bed, start and see what happens. Nature rewards those who trust her. If this story has changed your view of the earth beneath your feet, then subscribe to this channel and like the video. We're digging here for knowledge that was almost lost. Let's sow the future together. Nature's next treasure will soon be revealed.